This is Carrie from Wrap Your Head Around Silks. This is the Expectant Aerialist podcast, now with the Digit Network. What would you like to say, podcaster Bean?
Well,
come here. Closer. Come on.
Well, me and Mommy do good things together, and we go to the park and the lake class and to play places.
We do the most fun things together?
And we play games.
We play games together, and you just got slime, right? To play with?
Yeah, and Mama touched the slime.
And it's disgusting. The texture of slime makes me want to throw up.
No!
Okay, can I finish this intro? And then we go get fun things to do, okay? The last bit of work Mama has to do right now, okay?
Boop, boop, boop.
Okay, now you want to sit here or you want to go over there?
Sit here.
Okay, just be quiet and let me do it, okay?
Okay.
All right, my friends. So check out the show notes, Wrap Your Head Around Silk. So we have a lot of things. Always roll it out Mondays and Thursday evenings, 7 o'clock p.m. Pacific time. We also have an online portal if you cannot make that time. Balls, foam rollers, we take care of our aerial muscles. And it has transformed my practice because I am not in pain currently. Oh, is that a booger?
Yes.
Also have a comprehensive beginner to intermediate course that is available online. It is lifetime access. So basically, if you have a practice that you're in and out of because it's just so hard with work and life and family and stuff. So you have all the basics there and then a little of my special juice. You know what I'm saying? I'd love to have you as an online student. We have aerial rehab as well. And then what else do I have? Teacher training. If you guys are interested in that, if you're at that stage in your aerial life. And yeah, it's so fun, right, Bean? Is it fun? Yup. All right, today is part 2 of a conversation with Aaron Cause, host of Cirque Psy podcast. And he is like so entertaining to me. I feel like we clicked right away. Today, I was in the hot seat. Last time, he was more of like I grilled him. Asked him questions. This time, he asked me questions on the trends that I'm seeing with the perinatal aerialists, what I'm seeing, how we can address it in our training, and we nerd out. We talk about butts. We talked about butts, right? And we talked about anterior pelvic tilt. We talked about a lot of the different problems us women who go through pregnancy and then come out of it, you know, how we have to heal our bodies and recover. So I am psyched for you guys to hear this. Let's get started. Can you say let's get started?
Let's get started.
Let's get started. I am so excited to be in a hot seat.
Oh, all right. Well, welcome to Cirque Psy, and thank you for hopping on as a guest and your own podcast, I know. But you are usually the interviewer, not the one being interviewed. And I think something that you have probably pretty good insight into as the interviewer on your own podcast is information about trends and patterns that you've noticed among the folks you've interviewed yourself, which is just like a really broad pool of people and aerialists who have gone through pregnancy and the complications and challenges that they may face during that time or after. So yeah, thank you again for hopping on. I just want to start really broadly, like what are some of the most common trends that you've seen anecdotally on your podcast?
Yeah, anecdotally. So I'm talking about stories. Obviously, there's no scientific stuff on this yet. Some experts have come on the podcast and gave me expert thoughts. But so I'm going to read down this list that I wrote up last night, and you can like ask me to like zero in on one of these, okay?
For sure, and we're going to unpack some of them, definitely.
Or higher numbers of hypertonic pelvic floor, so it's super tight pelvic floor versus the general population. I've heard from many women who have a super, super high pain tolerance and have trained their pain tolerance over the years, say that unmedicated birth is the most painful event of their life. They use the term ring of fire a lot. You can go into that. So just, you know, the stretching of the vaginal canal being like the most painful thing they've experienced in their life. The lack of medical guidance postpartum from health professionals is a general terrible across the board. A lot in America, but even across the world. More often than not, our aerialist women in their pregnancies are training. They're training up until the day they go to the hospital or go to the birthing center in a lot of cases. Some, can you tell them what? I have my daughter here, listeners. I can't hear you, but listen, Bean, you got to let me finish this list.
Oh, ma'am, please.
Oh, ma'am, please. So this Expecting Your Aerialist podcast has a lot of my 4-year-old daughter in it. So a lot of these aerialists are training throughout their pregnancies. So if they don't get to the 3rd trimester, maybe some of them stopping in their 2nd trimester and then just resting the 3rd. But if they don't train at all, it's usually for a specific reason. For example, I had a low-lying placenta, sometimes called placenta previa, depending on which doctor you're asking. It's either low-lying or previa, where the placenta either partially covers the cervix or completely covers it, and you have a higher risk of bleeding out with just regular movement. So they put you on something called pelvic arrest, which is hard to do aerial with because all of our inversions are obviously all pelvis. So unless there's a reason like that, or there's hypertension or lots of nausea during the pregnancy, our aerial women are training throughout their pregnancies with a modified skills. Next thought I had is that the combination of hypermobility that's already there, that aerialists already are very aware of. So pregnant women who are also hypermobile, the relaxin comes in during their pregnancy, and it has become a minefield for a lot of these women, and they talk about all the ways in which it has been. Another general thought coming from a lot of these women, recovery from diastasis recti, where the six-pack abs spread, and that's 100% of the time they're saying for pregnancy now. That's the stat. So every pregnant woman has some level of diastasis. It takes way longer than we want it to heal, but generally, women in this population are correcting it through exercise. Pubic symphysis, which is where the bones in the front of the pelvis kind of shift and go uneven, and it creates a lot of pain in the front of the pubic bone. That and carpal tunnel through the wrists, hitting some aerialists really hard during pregnancy. The anecdotal trend I've seen with women is that if they're hypermobile anyway, they have very high occurrence of that compared to somebody who's not hypermobile. So it's just happening a lot in those stories. So basically, bottom line, their fascia, their connective tissues are slightly looser, things are moving around and creating pain. And then for me particularly, and a lot of women, difficulty in correcting anterior pelvic tilt postpartum, because when you're pregnant, most women end up with some degree of an anterior pelvic tilt because of the way the baby's in the front. And if you're already one of those people who struggle with that, I have my whole life, it gets exacerbated. And then to pull the body back into alignment with exercise after the baby's born is like a fight. So, do you like this list, Aaron?
I do like the list. I'm actually I've got a little bit of follow-up questions that I want to ask about most of them. And so just going back to the beginning, in terms of hypertonic pelvic floor, I mean, we talked about this a little bit last time, but anecdotally, when you've seen that among the folks that you've interviewed, where does that exhibit as like the number one area where pregnant aerialists or postpartum or prenatal could benefit from support from, medical professionals, from coaches, from physios, et cetera, that you think we haven't touched on already?
Yeah, I think mostly it's the awareness, because most of the guidance from professionals to the general population is do Kegels. And so you have somebody who doesn't realize that they have a tight pelvic floor already. Like me, I didn't realize I was tighter than I should be. Either because tonally you're tighter. So if a PT puts their fingers up there, they'll be like, you're high tone. I am not. I checked with a pelvic floor specialist. I'm not high tone. But the contraction was never wanting to relax. So there's two different, well, they can be combined. But for me, I just wasn't relaxing the contraction. Other people have high tone. So basically, it's just like a kind of like a one bad thing leads to another, where the general population is getting this advice to do Kegels, whereas they need to get the advice based on where their tissue is, like where their neutral is, and then leading to, I talked about the pain of natural childbirth without medication. I have not experienced that myself. I will never. At this point.
Honestly,
thankfully,
I don't. Yeah. Whew. That sounds rough.
Pushing a watermelon out of there with no medication. I mean, women are badasses, but I will not put myself through that for any reason. But imagine, if your pelvic floor is healthy and able to relax, like any muscle that you need to relax and stretch, it will stretch without tearing. But if it's too tight, you'll either Aaron's face.
I'm not empathizing because I can't, but I'm sympathizing because just the description is making me feel uncomfortable in my meat suit in a way that I don't often. Oh boy. Okay, continue.
Yeah, God, this is, it's so funny because we have a different podcast, like you and I have different podcasts. And for sure, this is like the theme of my podcast every single time I get on. So I'm very used to it.
Yeah, and it's not that pelvic floors gross me out. It's not that pregnancy. It's the fact that I'm imagining someone who is hypertonic in their pelvic floor, then trying to do something that's already humanly kind of impossible seeming just from a baseline. So then you're like, okay, cool. So we're making this already small hole less likely to get bigger for this one kind of, as you said, ring of fire event. Anyway, that's all that face was for.
Yeah, and you've got these women who are type A, just strong core, tight pelvic floor, and this poor little baby wants to come out, and it just doesn't add up to serving us. Mm-hmm. And in some cases, you end up with pelvic organ prolapse, because what happens when you stretch too quickly a muscle that's not in a position to be stretched, you blow it out, right? So that's totally a scientific term, Aaron. You blow it out. So you end up having to recover in a way that you never expected to. So this conversation is happening all the time on my podcast. And the big key thing is figure out where your neutral is if you're the woman, so that you can get the right direction on how to train your pelvic floor for this event of Ring of Fire. Because even if you have an epidural, you can still seriously damage those muscles down there, even if you're not feeling it in the moment. The other thing that has happened with a bunch of women that I've talked to is they go through that. They have the hypertonic pelvic floor, they have the birth, and then their incontinence after is just so hard to go back to normal. And it takes a long time of physical therapy. There's also been the instance of using assists, like the vacuum assist, where they put the thing in there and they suck the baby's head out and, Mm-hmm. And that, I'm not sure if they've done a study, but there's higher instances of urinary incontinence after a vacuum assist.
Rough. Yeah. Yeah. And I think what you're saying about, finding your neutral, this is something that if we think about, anterior pelvic tilt as well, kind of ties into that, right? Because whether it's our pelvic floor musculature and the hypotonic kind of being stuck in a relaxed state or being stuck in a contracted state or having a hard time relaxing, you can have that same idea for being in excessive anterior or excessive posterior pelvic tilt, right? We want to know kind of what neutral is for us and why it's meaningful. And I think, yeah, that's something that general guidance that you'd get from a doctor, from a podcast of just do 10 Kegels might not be the right approach for you.
Yeah, finding neutral with that pelvic tilt too. It as everything else, it's all connected. And having a posterior pelvic tilt and diastasis recti at the same time is a really bad combination.
Wait, having anterior pelvic tilt and diastasis recti. Okay, cool.
It is a bad combination for somebody who wants to heal the way I want to heal. Because I'm sure you could walk around with a terrible pelvic angle and your like mommy pooch kind of hanging out. And I think some women think that's just the postpartum body. They think it's just, okay, I had a baby, so I have a mommy pooch. My belly sticks out. But you and I, we have this functional movement background and everything we know. Really, you don't necessarily have a mommy pooch. The skin might be a little looser, but there's also a chance that your pelvis is tilting too much, and that if you bring it back to neutral, it will help you finish recovering from the diastasis and sewing the belly button back together. And then you can do the exercises where you do the core exercises, the transverse abdominis exercises, and have kind of the center that you want to have again. You know, I have to fight this all the time because my body already wanted to do that tilt. So it's a lot of awareness around it while we're training.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it's one thing that's interesting and tricky about pelvic tilt is that, you know, when we look at most spines, there's lumbar extension built into our spine. That's supposed to be there, right? Our spine's an S-curve. So we have thoracic kind of rounding at the top and lumbar extension at the bottom. And then we can have that kind of taken to the extreme of like someone who is literally like sticking their butt out and in super anterior pelvic tilt. We want to find, we want to find that neutral, right? I'm imagining that I'm stuck in APT from pregnancy. I want to find that neutral. And then also, even if I can't find that neutral, I can still start building strength in my transverse abdominis, my rectus abdominis, etc. When you've talked to people who have kind of gone through this process, would you say that it's almost a requirement that they find spinal neutral or pelvic neutral before they start strengthening their abs, or they could kind of start building strength back in their abs, in their transverse abdominis, in their rectus abdominis, in their obliques, even if they're not necessarily totally clear on, okay, where is neutral?
That's such an interesting question. I think that the priority before either one of those things, either the strength training or the getting the bones to be in the right place, is the participation of the muscles that are supposed to be working. Mm-hmm. That is the priority, because what I've learned is that the whole thing gets messed up if that's not there. Like you end up using the wrong muscles for you end up using your quads instead of your hip flexors instead of your core. So it's like, I almost feel like we can really correct this in our own training postpartum if we start with the breathing techniques that are very common now if you like Google it or if you take a course, to do the pelvic floor / core breathing techniques that you are progressively adding small movement and seeing if you can still engage those muscles. What happens, even to me, we are impatient. We've said this before. We do the biggest movement. We don't have the participation of the muscles that should be working. And then we have these imbalances and these patterns that start building, and we have to go fix it later on. So really, it's the participation. And then, me in the gym, when I'm teaching my students, I do a couple breathing rounds of breath on the floor, just feet on the floor, knees up, and then making sure to recruit everything. And then also in the same session, doing like a glute bridge where my back, there's those stacked gymnastics mats in the gym. I put my upper back on it, stick a 20-pound dumbbell on my pelvis, and then Also in the past, when I was in PT, I would do that and then my lower back would completely participate and my glutes would turn off. So my PT had me do it in like a triangle position, heels together, feet out, like knees pointed out a little bit. That helped. And then I was able to change the angle of my pelvis in the exercise because basically if I'm not really tilting posteriorly and then doing the glute bridge, my glutes turn off, my own body. So that diaphragmatic breathing exercise, the glute bridge, and then I start into my inversions on hammock, and then I start climbing silks. And adding in squats, looking into the mirror profile, so that when I stand up and the glutes turn on, my hips go into a very neutral position. You know what? Okay, I'm going to take a little detour. You know what's my biggest pet peeve on Instagram Reels?
There could be so many answers to that I have no idea,
Where
Carrie,
I'm going
because
with
that is a broad potential.
Well, Erin and I are both CPTs. We're both, personal trainers in the gym type of situation. But I see all these hot babes doing like squats, loaded, weights in their hands. And when they come up to get to the top of it, their butt's still sticking out. Like they're not finishing the movement.
Okay, but I would say three things to gently push back against that.
Okay.
Thing one, chances, there's a small percent chance that some of that is marketing because butts sell. Like,
yes.
I'm not saying that should be the case, but I think there's a possibility of that. Thing two, our butts all stick out, especially if you have a bigger butt. Like, I want a butt that...
Not the meat. I'm talking about the angle of the pelvis. Like, they're not finishing the movement.
But you don't want to finish a squat necessarily with posterior pelvic tilt. You just want to finish in neutral. And like what neutral looks like is really different from person to person. And this is something that I think if you go back in the physio kind of dialogue literature, I don't know, maybe 20 years ago, it was like, all right, we're going to like analyze pelvic tilt and whatnot and blah, blah, blah. And then we're going to see how that is tied to or correlated with injury rates in the low back, et cetera. And now, at least from what I can tell, reading the research, listening to other people who are smarter than me talk about it, it seems like there is at least some pushback against the fact that visually assessing pelvic tilt is a good measure of someone being like in or out of alignment, quote unquote.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, like we're really bad. Humans generally are really bad at like assessing if something is this way or this way, because even a shift in lighting can make a muscle look bigger or can change the perspective that we have. Obviously, like with, fitness influencers using lighting to make themselves look like they have more of a six-pack, that's like a very clear example. But even just if someone's body is slightly tilted to the camera and there's lighting in a certain way, that can change our visual perception of someone's structure. And that perception of that structure doesn't necessarily have as much carryover to injury risk as I think was long thought for a while. I'm not saying that there's not a trend of this in reels and that there is like there are people who are maybe not finishing standing up all the way in their squat, but I think sometimes the visual assessment is hard. Like I want to be more nitpicky, and also I think that it's not always easy to tell like, oh, is this someone not completing a movement, or is this someone's just like their body shape and how they are in the world? Okay,
I have two questions here. Did you get trained through NASM, the National Association of Sports Medicine?
Yeah, it was terrible.
Okay, so they have something called they're basically doing assessment with a squat. That's their assessment.
Yep.
Is that something you would debate against?
I don't know if you had a chance to listen to any of the interviews that I did, or the interview I did with Greg Lehman, who is kind of the founder of this perspective on movement and biomechanics called movement optimism. And this is a little bit of a tangent for listeners.
It's okay. We're gonna take a right turn and go back.
Yeah. But I think it's worth talking about at least a little bit when we talk about things like anterior pelvic tilt and almost the way that APT can be pathologized a little bit. But essentially, there's so much room for human variability in movement in kind of the like kinematics, the joint angles of movement. And in that variability, there's a lot of room for things to be totally fine and not increase risk of injury. Like most people are asymmetrical, right? If we're looking at someone, the chances are there's some part of their body that is higher, lower, twisted forward, twisted backwards, etc. And does that immediately equal injury risk? Not necessarily. Or injury? Not necessarily. So in that squat pattern in NASM, which I'm totally like, I remember the diagrams. I remember like,
yeah, me too.
I looked at it from the front and the side, all that stuff. I think the example that I kind of like to think about when considering this is like, there's an Australian physio who works at the National Circus School. I forgetting his name off the top of my head. But essentially, he was referencing how they had a contortionist who, you know, insane amounts of anterior pelvic tilt, insane amounts of it. And they were doing just like some research, kind of like case studies on circus artists. And they were like, you know, like, let's get a scan, like an MRI scan of this person's spine and see what it looks like. So they did an MRI of this person's spine. And in addition to like extreme, incredible amounts of anterior pelvic tilt, lumbar extension, etc., they also had, I forget the exact spinal injury, but like some issues with their bone structure and their spine that if you didn't have the context of what this person was doing, you'd be like, oh man, or of this person, you'd be like, they're going to be in pain. They're for sure, they're in lots of pain, etc. This person was doing triple folds, like butt on head, everything like full contortion style, no pain, nothing at all. And so I think it's obvious, like in that instance, literally none of what a contortionist doing a triple fold, none of that like is biomechanically optimal or correct or proper in any capacity. Does it mean that it's totally risk-free? No, nothing is totally risk-free. But if I'm looking at that and I'm like, okay, they're in that position, they're in extreme anterior pelvic tilt and there's an extreme lumbar extension, it's okay. And so I think for me, what matters more than the exact joint angle in a movement, because we can adapt to that, I think, over time, is the movement quality. So if someone is finishing their squat, standing up, and they don't look like they're about to fall over, that to me is more important than if they have like a little bit of anterior pelvic tilt at the end or something like that. But anyway, I think there's debate in the field, and it's not to say that biomechanics don't matter, but I think we don't always know how they matter as much as we thought they mattered in the past.
Yeah, and the NASM is very like generic. You know, it's like the CPT, and we both did this training, and I got a lot out of it. Do you hear her singing? Is that why you're laughing?
I'm sorry, it's just amazing. I was listening to you, but I was like, I don't know what she's singing, but she's loving it.
She is killing it over there. Okay, here's my second part to this tangent that we're on. I think you know what I'm talking about with this Instagram babe. Like they're building their glutes over and above like proportion to their own body. You know what I'm talking about?
Okay, but is that a problem or is that a preference?
That's the question. I don't necessarily, it looks nice, but I don't even know how one does this. Like I'm looking at these videos and I'm just like, do you have any thoughts on this?
Okay, this is a wild tangent, but let's go. We're going for it. Okay, so I think one, like if I had the motivation and time, I would for sure be putting that much effort into having a butt that was disproportionately bubble butt to the rest of my body. And I'm not even kidding, Carrie. I would.
Really?
But, yeah, absolutely. But I am extremely bad at putting on muscle, just any mass in general.
Me too.
It's like genetically, my metabolism is fucked. Food that I eat just runs right through me, whatever. I think, one, if it serves their goals, go for it. Whether that's aesthetic or just, hey, I want to lift a lot, like squat a lot, hip thrust a lot, deadlift a lot, whatever, that's fine.
Or at competitions too, because that's important for that.
Sure, yeah, competitions. And I think, one of the other things is like, if it serves their goals, like if part of their job is selling, and I'm not saying I agree with this because how we look, even though it does sell products, I wish it didn't, because there are so many people who look really fit and know jack shit about personal training. And there are people who don't look like a supermodel or whatever and know a ton about personal training and strength training and hypertrophy. So I think some of it is, it can be a sales technique, but I would say that there's also, for people where it looks unnatural, whatever that means, whether this is like a male bodybuilder,
disproportionate,
or someone who just has a butt that is disproportional to the rest of them, like sometimes that can just be like really targeted exercise. Sometimes it can be butt injections and like implants. Like I know that's a thing. People do that for their calves, they do that for their abs, etc. And sometimes like for dudes, when they look disproportionately large, that can straight up just be like steroids, testosterone, etc. So I'm not going to say, oh, for sure it's all fake, or oh, for sure it's injections or implants or whatever, but I think it could be any of them. And
Aaron, I feel like you should definitely, or maybe I'll do it for you, like come up with a meme and stick like a huge butt on yourself.
I would have to think about the relevance of this meme, but okay. So, but yeah, going back to anterior pelvic tilt and butts, like I think let's kind of connect this back to the question, because
see, this is why you're here, Aaron, because you pull us together, you pull it back.
Well, first of all, I love that tangent because I truly do wish I had a bigger butt for pure vanity reasons. I think it'd be awesome. But I think with APT, like especially thinking about, okay, if I'm coming back to aerial, I've given birth, maybe I've got APT, maybe I've got diastasis recti, maybe I had a C-section. I actually just had a client call with someone who has had 5 C-sections.
Whoa.
5. Now, they can do bicep, like iron cross roll-ups on straps, which is super fucking badass and awesome. And inversions, like aerial, just like straight leg inversions, a little bit challenging. For not like impossible, but like they've worked harder on that, or had to work harder for those than I think probably for like iron cross roll-ups and back flags. So when I think about this, I'm like, all right, this person who's probably been existing in some level of APT, maybe having, I don't know, like maybe having more than the optimal amount, they struggle with aerial inversions, but their back flag actually pretty solid. Now, if we think about a back flag reverse meat hook, you know what I'm talking about when I describe this?
Yeah, I can't do it, but I know what you're talking about.
If we think about that, what we want to do is like we want to like put our arm in our low back, in our spine. Now, if we're in more APT, this gives us more of a shelf to wrap around. If we're more here, we have to do a lot more with our shoulder. So for this person who had 5 C-sections and maybe was in more APT, and I'm not confident they were or weren't, I'm just saying if they were, this would actually almost be easier to hold if they were in that like more extended and APT position, if they were able to turn their glutes on. So I think if you, for your pregnancies and people you've interviewed, when someone was kind of stuck in APT, where did it impact them most in their aerial? Because I want to talk about that, because I want to talk about how we can troubleshoot that beyond just like building core strength and building, the finding that neutral again.
And I just had a conversation with another aerialist about this who just had a umbilical hernia, like congenital one, recovered. Oof. She's just recovering from surgery. What I see a lot, they have this anterior pelvic tilt and they can't figure out how to invert anymore. So they're throwing their head back while they're inverting because they think if they look where they're going, their body's going to follow.
Mm-hmm.
Their abs are not, their six-pack abs are not pulling together because they're in an arched position already through their entire spine.
And it's way harder, for sure.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. And then the pelvic tilt is at the very bottom of the spine, and it's just hanging back. So their head is going back, and they're in this completely terrible position trying to invert, and you can imagine not happening.
All right. So first of all, 100%. If I actively try to arch my back as much as possible and then lift my legs, it's fucking way harder. Absolutely. Now, one thing that I was thinking about before this conversation was, okay, let's assume that in a lot of pregnancy cases, there's going to be some diminished capacity of the abdominal muscles and hip flexors and connecting a leg raise to spinal flexion to help with an inversion, right? Let's just assume that's probably going to happen to a large number of people. Like you said, 100% for diastasis recti is kind of the new rate, which is a large number of people who are getting pregnant, right? Like, yeah. So if I have that information coming into pregnancy or pre-pregnancy, obviously, like I want to do all I can to strengthen my core and my hip flexors and try to build as much like neurological mind-muscle connection of those muscles. But, and I'm not saying that this is by any means like an easier solution, another solution or way of kind of getting around the challenge of like, all right, my abs are doing jack shit for me while I'm inverting for the first, whoever knows how long when I'm coming back to aerial. One solution, doesn't mean it's easier, but one potential solution is rather than being like, all right, I need to invert with a leg raise and then a spinal flexion and then a straight arm press. One, obviously bent arm inversions, people can always go back and use those when they're having trouble with straight arm. But I would almost argue that knowing that we're going to have a diminished core musculature capacity is a good argument for building even more shoulder strength through that lat pressing motion. So like if I'm in hanging position, my arms are overhead as much as my shoulder flexion allows. If I have a hard time getting rid of my lumbar extension and my anterior pelvic tilt, if I'm really strong through my lats, I can drive an invert. One can drive an invert through their lats almost entirely. So I'm not saying that that's going to be the easy solution, but, and I just want to show you, there's a contortionist in New York. I don't remember who it was, who essentially, the way that they inverted most easily was by using a pathway similar to what I'm going to show here. So instead of doing hip flexion, spinal flexion, and again, I'm not saying this is easier, it's just another movement solution to getting my hips over my shoulders when I'm inverting. I'm essentially pressing up through there. Now, someone could arch way, 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 way more than I am here, but essentially I'm driving most of that movement from my lats rather than from my core and my hip flexors. So all I'm saying here is we know that we'll have diminished capacity or most likely diminished capacity in our abs, in our hip flexors, and the connection of our pelvis to our rib cage. We still want to work on that postpartum, but if we have super, super heckin' strong shoulders before we get pregnant and we can maintain that, then it can give us so much room for still getting our hips over our shoulders, even while we're having trouble engaging our abs and, you know, mitigating excessive anterior pelvic tilt, etc. Thoughts, questions? What do you think?
My first thought was when you said you can always modify back to your short arm if you can't do the long arm. I was like, modify back? Who are you talking about? I'm just sure. I don't have don't have a straight arm inversion right now, and I'm like giving him stank
You should, because that was a bad way of phrasing it. And no. I genuinely, when I said that, I was like, ooh, I wish I had said that a little bit differently. Like, I would have meant to say, like, you can do bent arm in, like, or straight arm. But in either case, whether it's bent arm or straight arm or the video I showed you, a lot of that movement is coming from our lats, which you need to build, or to do that with less core compression and less core strength, you for sure need a lot more shoulder strength, especially postpartum.
Yes.
Sorry,
okay.
but fair point.
No, but I'm gonna give you shit about it because it's hilarious. Because if you've seen his videos and you've seen my videos, we have a very different practice. But we're okay. We're okay being different. You don't want this anymore? Okay. So 2 things. For my clients who are postpartum or not even, and they're just starting, because I have a lot of beginners, like beginner self students. They've just walked in off the street. My modifications for them, anyway, to get their inversion from the first time, is the same thing that I did postpartum. So I just like progressed it really like a bazillion steps. Like, first we're doing the stuff on the ground and the breathing. Then we have a hammock doing assisted stuff. The knees are bent. We're not having shoulders involved 100% yet, even though we're using our arms a little bit. And then I have a bazillion exercises there. And then we're using the shoulders. A lot of those people, I'm like training them to turn on the lats for the first time, because they're climbing with their arms and their hands, but they're not climbing with their lats. And I'm like, it's not going to work over time. It's going to be really problematic. Okay, so on a separate note, the woman who is the second half of Duo Rose Trapeze, she just had her second child, and I just interviewed her. And we were talking about her prenatal maintenance, because I think they had a contract, her and her husband, to do an act 10 weeks after she had the baby.
Hot damn.
Yeah, like fast. So she knew this, and she knew to get back at that time what she'd have to do prenatal. And she told me that the way that she knew she could get back to her act that quickly is all shoulder stuff. So she had bands attached to all these like things in her house, and it was all the lat press down. It was the arm in front to the side, because maintaining that lat connection and those strong shoulders, she knew was the key to obviously doing the breath work after. But she knew she could do that diaphragmatic work, she did not have a C-section. She could get her abs back to okay if she had her shoulders at 100%.
I think that's a really good anecdote. Yeah, that makes, honestly, like, especially if you go back to thinking about the different American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists recommendations, is like, one of the big things is like, you're not really supposed to do a lot of supine exercise while pregnant, which is lying face up. Lying face up is one of the primary ways we would do ab exercises, right? Or we could. But there's really no recommendation against doing pull-ups, pull-downs, lat presses, lat pull-downs, all of these things that can keep our shoulders super duper strong while someone is pregnant. And so if they come back and they give birth, they're training their abs, and they've been doing pull-ups, pull-downs, lat presses, like lateral lat presses, etc., then they can come back and be a lot closer to where they were, or even stronger than where they were if they were progressively overloading in their shoulders after pregnancy. There's a lot of dialogue in the space, and I am not saying Pilates is bad, but there's a lot of dialogue, I think, especially coming from Pilates coaches, where kind of lack of core strength gets blamed for the inability to do a lot of movements. And I think, yes, core strength can matter, but like you just said, we can struggle with our inversions because of our hip flexors, because of our core, because of our lats, because of the motor pattern and coordination. And if we look at people, I'm going to throw out a friend of mine, his name is Garrett. He's probably one of the strongest people I know. He for sure has a strong core, but never trains his core. Like, if I look at the movements he's doing, I'd be like, oh man, they are really, really hard. And someone else might look at those and be like, oh man, his core must be so strong. But so much of what we do in the air is supported by our core. We want to transmit force through our core, whether it's in beats or flares or inversions. But the primary driver of a lot of movements is not necessarily our rectus abdominis. It's not necessarily our TVA. Those are helping us transmit force from our hip flexors to our shoulders. Or our obliques can sometimes do a little bit more core work in C shaping, like we talked about last time. But I was just agreeing with you that core is not the reason why we can't invert all the time.
You know, like just the momming things, like picking her up with one hand, with one arm. We talk a lot about this on the podcast too, just the lifestyle things. Like I'm reaching back to hand her like a sippy cup in the car while I'm driving. Over and over, just on my right side. I messed up my shoulders in the first couple years of her life. And then lo and behold, my inversions start struggling because my shoulders are not recruiting and they're not doing their job. So yeah, I think it's important for aerialists to know that when they're training postpartum or not, you know.
Yeah, for sure. Actually, I think you just spoke to probably something that should exist, whether or not it does already, I don't know. But almost regardless of whether you're an aerialist or not, like a strength training for recent moms and recent parents, like protocol. If you think about it, like if you just had a kid, you need to be able to constantly hold somewhere between like 10 and 20 pounds in one arm while you're like going into shoulder extension and internal rotation behind you, fishing around for your keys or the sippy cup with the other arm. So you need the range of motion back here and need to make sure you're not doing it while you're like jacking up your, anyway, that's a whole nother.
Yeah, I think we could finish with this topic because it is a really, really, really big problem, you know?
Yeah.
My keep on trying. We're almost done. Okay. And then you can say goodbye to Aaron.
Okay.
All right. This lifestyle thing, and occupational therapists do touch on this for sure. So it's not like unserved at all, but it's not like a strength training necessarily. It's awareness. It's more PT for life.
Yeah.
I in my life am like, okay, I have the kid in my arms who is now 35 pounds, by the way. I know if I put her a little bit back on my hip, that's going to put my shoulder in a little too much stretch back there. And then I have to squat down and pick something up. If I'm not thinking about doing that movement correctly, it will 100% be done wrong. From a functional standpoint, from a functional movement standpoint, I will be doing everything wrong and eventually injuring myself. And so it is very important for moms who kind of, you know, if they're tuning into your podcast, it's because they have a certain awareness anyway, because this is super nerd out. And with mine, it's because these problems occur, you know, the posture and breastfeeding. You're breastfeeding hours a day and your shoulders are going forward and your head is down. You're looking at your beautiful angel of a baby and completely wrecking your back. Your pecs are getting too tight, you know, your rhomboids are overstretched, your neck is getting all this tension from this posture that you are in a lot in the first year if you're breastfeeding. And so what a parenthood, motherhood, and infant OT would do was to set you up for success and really talk about which seat are you in, which supportive pillow do you have underneath your baby. Maybe you have to get a selfie stick and put your phone at your eye line so that you're not looking down as you're breastfeeding, because you're trying to like, you know, it's like 30 minutes of boob. It's a lot of time.
Yeah.
That breastfeeding posture. I made a course called Aero Rehab for Postpartum, and a lot of it is like just bringing awareness to these things and exercises that you can do. Like when you are able to get those couple minutes on the floor with the roller or in the gym, you know, we have to strengthen the back. Because if not, you're just gonna be in pain. A lot of women are gonna be in pain.
Yeah. And I think this goes, like, first of all, I think that course is probably awesome and worth checking out. And I will never need it, but I imagine there are plenty of people listening who will probably at some point be like, oh, I could use a course like that. But yeah, it's like, okay, we have to be mindful of the positions we're putting ourselves in repeatedly, or movements we're doing repeatedly, like you said, breastfeeding, or I'm holding my kid in one arm for 30 minutes to 60 minutes at a time, and how I can do that, how I can do things on the floor. And then this goes back to the first chat we had, which is like, we should probably be weightlifting and getting as strong as we possibly can before pregnancy, so that during and after pregnancy, our back is really strong, our mid traps are really strong, our rhomboids are already really strong, so that they're able to do what we need to ask them to do. Like if I can do, let's say, 3 sets of horizontal rows out like this, that's at like, I don't know, 30 to 60 pounds an arm, that's going to have a huge impact on my ability to just like hold a 30-pound child for quite a while, right? If I'm doing deadlifts where I'm doing like single leg, single arm deadlifts where I have 30 pounds in one arm, 3 sets of 12 on each side, like that's going to help me a ton with the ability to bend over, pick things up awkwardly while holding, who knows, a child.
Yeah, and little things like maybe don't buy a baby bag that's not a backpack. Things like that. Yeah, women
I draw too.
and men, because they have,
I draw too.
I know you're drawing. So there's a lot of things that my podcast covers in this, because it's lifestyle and it's the medical stuff and it's the PT. And it all comes together with this training that you're talking about, because I really think that generally the aerialists that I'm talking to are in a way better place to start than the general population. Either because they have the knowledge or because we are strengthening those muscles before we're pregnant. For a lot of the women are pregnant after they've already started the practice. Some not, but for the most part, a lot of us, the aerial practice came first, the baby came second, and then those principles that we already know are serving us well if we're mindful about it and we're using these skill sets that we've created over time.
Yeah, for sure. I think that a lot of athletes, while they're not necessarily considering that they may or may not get pregnant, they're doing themselves a service by getting strong and getting like stable. And then if they become pregnant, they have, like you said, those foundations, those skill sets, that awareness to support themselves through their pregnancy, with maybe the only big downside being the potential like hypertonic pelvic floor rates being higher among aerialists. But that's something that we can adapt and address.
Yeah, that's something that you can address if you know what your body, what the problem is. My listeners, this is not the end of Erin Cosharu, and for your listeners, this is not the end of Carrie Wee. We'll do it again.
I don't think it is, and I hope your listeners aren't tired of hearing me talk about things just yet.
I don't think so. I think we're funny together. It's like, I feel like you're my brother from another sarcastic mother.
It could be. It would be surprising, but it could be.
Erin, oh my goodness. So this is what happens before an interview. We DM like trying to figure out what we're going to talk about. And my thing is like, let's just go with it, because it's fun. And also I have to do less work if we do that. And he's like, no, we need to be prepared, or I need to be prepared. So I sent him a list of things. He sends me a list of things. And we got to like, maybe 5% of those things. And so we'll do this again. I'm not sure if it's going to come right after this, but we'll definitely have Erin on again. I'll be on his podcast again. If you haven't yet checked out Cirque Psy, it is a deep dive. It is like a nerd out fest of circus plus training, plus functional movement, plus neuroscience, plus mind-body connection. It is so fun. And I'm so glad that you reached out to me and we became part of each other's world. What else? Please honor me with a 5-star rating and a review. It helps so much. Check out Greener Grass Podcast, the show that I do with Kelly McVeigh. That's like a really good like commute, or when you have to commute to work or you're doing your laundry, just to listen to some chatter. It's fun. We're light, nothing too serious. And what would you like to say to listeners? Would you just like to say goodbye? Hey, go up to the mic. Say goodbye.
Well, goodbye.
Is that it?
Oh no.
Say have a lovely week.
Have a lovely week and have a good week and having your good stuff.
Yeah, have good snacks, right?
Yeah.
Snacks are the nectar of life, right?
Yeah, and you have good fun at your homes and your moms and dads.
Yeah, have fun with your parents. Awesome, guys. Over and out. This is Carrie from Wrap Your Head Around Silks. This is Expecting Aerialist. Bye.
Bye.